Hello, welcome to Fundamentals of Art and our first lesson in art history. This is Mr. Nate Stromberg. This is a course that I've written over the course of many years, and we'll be spending quite a bit of time in this class studying a brief overview of art history. And I want to talk about why we do that. Why do we study art history? Why is it important to do so? It's because of this reason right here. Art holds a mirror to culture. Another way of saying that would be that art reflects culture, right? Every work of art that you see is created by an artist who lives in a particular time period under a specific set of societal norms, things that people do in that culture. And art is created for purposes within culture. So by looking at works of art, we can come to understand a lot about people, about what they express and how they express it, and we can learn so much. That's why it's essential to do it. And learning about art is just a way to see the world in a different way and to appreciate it. I hope this is interesting. I hope that you find it rewarding, and I hope that going forward it's something that enriches the experience of living and seeing the world around you, understanding that we're all, as humans, share this collective bond of creativity and our desire to create things. It's something that makes us unique as humans that we do this. So, as part of this course, we're going to do an overview of essential works of art, mainly in the Western tradition. Now, the reason being is we are part of the Western tradition as opposed to the Eastern tradition, which is largely Chinese, Japanese, Korean art, Indian art. And we simply don't have the time to do an extensive overview of the entire world of art history. That doesn't mean that outside influences and Eastern influences won't be talked about. They certainly will. But we're going to mainly be looking at the art from the Renaissance up to the present. That would be the art from European art from the 1400s up through present day in order to understand, as we talked about with art mirroring culture, why things are the way they are today and what we can learn about the human experience over the last 100 years, a couple hundred years, by looking at art. In order to understand what the Renaissance is, the word Renaissance actually means rebirth, okay, or the rebirth of culture that happened in the 1400s in places like Italy. We first of all need to understand what happened in the world before that. So the first part here today, I'm going to attempt in the next 40 minutes or so to talk about prehistoric art and art as far back as we can go, all the way up to 2,000 years ago, roughly. Okay, so I'll be looking at art BC today, tens of thousands of years compressed into just a couple minutes we have together. Our next session, we're going to look at the art of the Middle Ages, and that will lead us up to the beginning of the Renaissance. So I would encourage you to pay attention, to jot notes down as you can, to consider the discussion questions that hopefully you have with you, and look for general themes that tend to pop up. I'm going to go quickly. I'm not going to be able to go into extensive detail on a lot of things, but I try to make this as entertaining and enlightening as possible, so that you'll see things and hopefully learn something and find something intriguing. Something will hopefully grab you today in your lesson. Some of this will overlap with other things that you've learned or will learn in classes such as world history, language courses, other things that you may have taken as well. And like I said, art has the ability to make the things you already know or see in other areas feel more enriching as well. So let's get going. How far back can we go? The earliest works we can look at are works of art in caves. You've probably seen pictures of these. I like this photo because you can see the outline of a researcher here deep within this cave. This is Lascaux Cave in France, but they found these caves in France and in Spain, um, I believe in Portugal, other places as well. Um, and they go deep down inside these caves, and what do they find on the ceiling? They find pictures of animals drawn with charcoals, and pieces of naturally occurring rock, so black and red and white. They find handprints as well. So what? Somebody drew on a cave a long time ago. Why is this important? Well, when these were discovered, they completely changed the way that archaeologists thought about the history of humanity. It's been estimated that these are 40,000 to 30,000 years old. That's an incredibly long period of time. And up until these were found, popular notion was to believe that uh, the humans at that time were cavemen, right? Primitive types, and you've all seen the stereotype, you know, crude, dressed in animal skins with clubs, and certainly not sophisticated, creative people. And then all of a sudden, these caves are found and dated back tens of thousands of years, and here these people who were part of a society. Remember, art mirrors culture. They were part of a society where uh, every single day was a fight for survival, to find food, to hunt, or to gather food however you can find it, and to find shelter, and to protect yourself from wild animals. I mean, inconceivable how difficult those lives would have been. Life expectancy was certainly quite low back then. Even though we don't know much about these people, we know that life was incredibly hard. Um, and yet, even these people have the ability and the desire to draw these incredible pictures of animals. Not only are they, is it amazing that people did that, but they're deep within these caves, sometimes 15, 20 feet off the ground in pitch black darkness, which means some effort went into it, right? They had to bring something back there to stand on, probably by torchlight. Um, and, there's no schooling for these people. There's no training in how to draw animals. Like, this is what they see, so they're observing it, and then they're figuring out how to, from what they've observed in their brain, with a piece of charcoal, moving their arm, mimic what they're seeing in the real world, which, when you think about that, is a remarkable thing. And here you have the trace or the mark of anonymous person. We have no idea who they are, from tens of thousands of years ago, long gone, having made this image. What are they, and why did they do it? Some people have said that perhaps they're chronicling the hunt. Maybe they worshipped these animals. Sometimes you see animals that are now, extinct in these parts of the world as well. And they have found bones and other things in these caves too. So, or perhaps it's just somebody going up there and doing it because they can. In any case, absolutely remarkable to show how sophisticated human minds were, even 40,000 years ago. There are lots and lots of pictures of these, so I won't go into lots of them. But here you can see another one from a different cave that has deer here and little hunters with bows and arrows. And anyway, fascinating to be able to know that what we were capable of, even in societies that perhaps didn't value art in any sort of way that we would understand today as part of organized society. So from that, you can look at all sorts of objects from the ancient world. Here's an incredibly awkward sculpture about the size of a softball, probably the most famous prehistoric sculpture, also 30 to 35,000 years old here, probably in all likelihood here, called the Venus of Willendorf. She's a fertility goddess here. It's just a rock that's been carved into the shape of a woman here. What would these have been for? Probably, in someone's home in order to, bring good luck and fertility to families. And, maybe worshipped in some way as an idol. Who knows? But people, have the ability to do things like carve rocks. And there are societies all around the world that have objects that have been found and continue to be found that challenge, how advanced the human mind was, and the need for art, even back in times when basic survival was a day-to-day um, importance. So what I want to do is talk then about the great cultures of the ancient world and bounce around a little bit in time here. Um, of course, we have uh, all around the world the first of the great cultures start emerging wherever there are rivers. Okay, so we have the Nile River in Egypt. We'll talk about Egypt in a moment. This is from the Mesopotamian region, which is also called the Fertile Crescent, so modern day Iraq and Syria. If you think about Tigris and Euphrates rivers, if you've learned about that, so great societies there. Also the Indus River in India and Pakistan, and there are also civilizations in China and other places as well. And why is that important? Well, where there are rivers, all of a sudden agriculture can be developed. You can start planting crops. You can start raising, domesticating animals. And when you have that, you can build cities. You don't have to move around all the time to find food and shelter. Now you can build cities and city structures. Once you have that, you have systems of government that come up. And oftentimes in these days, kings or ancient leaders, and they build buildings. And all of a sudden, art is needed to decorate the world around them. And so you get pieces like this. So this is ancient Mesopotamian art here. And you can see here, it's a bit of a carved tablet that would have, laid into the side of a building here. And you can see, from thousands of years ago, the shape of a boat. If you look close, there are animals in the river. There's a crab, lobster type looking thing, some fish, and the boatmen here rowing this huge ancient boat. And artists clearly trying to show the movement, or flow of the river, even though it doesn't so much look like the boat is down in the water, but more than hovering on the top of it. But still showing a definite need and desire on the part of ancient society here to use visuals, in a deliberate way. We don't often think about our writing as art. But think about it. What a weird thing that we, with our alphabet, we have little symbols that we write that somehow correspond to sounds you make with your mouth, and you're able to actually, write down language. And it's a monumental leap forward that societies were able to do that. This is ancient Mesopotamian as well. They developed what's called cuneiform writing. So this is a different kind of alphabet, which is little carved dashes into a rock here. It's funny, when they managed to translate, they found a lot of these, but a lot of them are pretty mundane, just daily things like shipping manifests and business receipt type things, not necessarily, ancient tales or stories, or of course they found some of those as well, but day-to-day things. You got to find a way to record things. People were not so dissimilar to people today in a lot of ways. Zooming way far ahead, here's Babylonian art. Babylonians eventually created just exquisitely beautiful carvings of animals and people as well in stone. Again, that people are able to mimic the real world in this way is a really impressive thing. If you've never tried to carve a piece of stone, it's a remarkably difficult thing to do. I have to highlight this. One of the ancient wonders of the world was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and this was part of that. It's called the Ishtar Gate, and it's actually, the slide is from a museum in Berlin, Germany, and I got to see this once, and hard to imagine how high it is. I think the whole thing is 40 feet high. So, when you're standing there, you're almost as tall as that first row of animals you can see there down at the bottom. But so it's very, very large. Big parts of the city would have been covered with this stone, exquisitely designed. Why is it impressive? Well, here's a close-up of one of the lions here. You can see, if you look towards the bottom there, partially restored, but if you look, you can see the bricks there, and each of the bricks has colored stones, and those are naturally occurring colored stone. And so what these artists have managed to do in this absolutely, just jaw-dropping work of art is to figure out how to basically, when they make all of the bricks, place the uh, stones into the brick and then piece it all together to make these lions. So in other words, it's like making all the pieces to a puzzle completely separate without putting the pieces together, because the bricks have to dry in the sun, and then once they're dried, you can actually build. So making all the pieces and then putting it together and having it look like this, absolutely remarkable. Beyond that, we have ancient Egypt. So we're actually going quite a ways back in time now. Egypt, one of the oldest civilizations in the world, and I'm sure that you've learned a little bit about the pyramids and the art of ancient Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Khufu in the center, the Great Pyramids of Giza here as well. Of course, in front of that we have the Sphinx. Okay, this huge rock outcropping, which was made into a half lion, half man sculpture as well. So obviously the ancient Egyptians have a very particular way of using art. What's fascinating about the Egyptians, super old, ridiculously old society that reigned for a super long period of time, and yet when you look at the art from very early and the art from very late, there are a lot of similarities. In other words, in Egypt, if you are an artist, you are expected not just to bring your own personal touches to everything, but to, make the body look a very specific way, write in a very specific way. It's all supposed to look somewhat the same. Art has a very important place in the way that the Egyptians show the world. Of course, pyramids are giant tombs, right? They're meant to show, they're meant to house the pharaoh when he died, along with his earthly possessions, so that he could take them into the afterlife with him. Long ago since plundered, because they were basically just huge billboards that said to thieves, unspeakable treasures of gold are inside here. And so in the thousands of years since they were created, long since looted, and they're empty. But the tallest man-made structures in the world, until the Eiffel Tower was built in Paris in the late 1800s. Of course, the Egyptians had advanced writing as well, called hieroglyphics. This, a very famous scroll called the Book of the Dead. They invented paper as well. Papyrus here, dried papyrus from the River Nile, is a lot more convenient to making scrolls than writing on big tablets of stone all the time. But you can see here, if you look closely, you have figures, okay, different from Egyptian mythology, gods and goddesses, some with animal heads, as well as rows of little symbols there. And those symbols correspond, again, to shapes that you make with your mouth, although they're pictograms. So instead of a random symbol like we would have for our alphabet, they actually correspond to natural world objects like people and birds and staffs and reeds along the Nile, that sort of thing. Here's a wall painting from inside of a tomb as well, and you can see how it works. Notice how the Egyptians show the body, okay? So, for example, you always show the body from the waist down, from in profile, from the side, so you always see the side of the feet, whereas the shoulders are always turned out like you're looking at them from the front. The face is always seen in profile, so you always see the nose from the front, but the eye is always, the face is in profile. The eye is always seen from the front as well. Egyptians believing the eye was the entrance to the soul. And so, not something that you can do in the real world, but artists obviously being trained in a very specific way to show the world. They did amazing sculptures as well. One of those that endures is the obelisk, or this super long, tall tower with a pyramid on the top. Lots of these are carved from solid pieces of granite weighing hundreds of tons. It's amazing that they were able to carve them at all, let alone lift them up into place. They become markers in significant places around ancient Egypt. Of course, a lot of what we know about ancient Egypt comes from one find, probably the most incredible archaeological find ever, and that's the tomb of King Tutankhamun. And so here's just one of 4 burial masks for the king and for his remains, and you can see gold here inlaid with turquoise and precious gems and paint as well. Absolutely exquisitely carved, and ridiculous skill. Now, crazy thing about King Tutankhamun, a relatively unknown king from about 1300 BC. Okay, so we're looking at 3,300 years ago. And just to put that into perspective, the pyramids, okay, were built about 3,200 BC. So they'd already been around for thousands of years before King Tutankhamun was around. So it just blows your mind to think about that, how old Egypt is. The reason they found Tutankhamun, and here, by the way, a huge frieze, okay, or carved scene here of the king with his young bride, is that he was buried in a place called the Valley of the Kings. Thousands of years after the pyramids were built, the whole idea was maybe to protect the king and his treasure from looters. We'll bury them where no one can see them. And so there's an obscure valley called the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, which is incredibly dry and remote. And even then, all of those tombs were found and plundered. And in 1910, Howard Carter, English archaeologist, stumbled across the one that hadn't been found from ancient times. So pretty amazing. King Tut only ruled for a couple years and was a minor king. Hard to imagine the amount of treasure that they would have found in the large tombs had they not been plundered in ancient times. I mean, they found room after room full of golden objects, and even things like bread and casks of wine and funerary flowers, and all of this 3,000 years old time capsule from the funeral of this king. Pretty incredible. Egyptians, amazing artists. Art has a major place in their society. Let's talk about the Greeks. Starting in about 600 BC, here, I guess we can look. This is the Parthenon, the most famous ancient Greek building here, which is in Athens, Greece, on the Acropolis. Acropolis is this big kind of flat top rock outcropping in the middle of the city, and up on the top they built this huge temple to Athena. And it should be said, these ancient civilizations, religion is a key part to their art as well, right? They have, for the Greeks and the Egyptians, and certainly for the Romans, who we'll talk about next, they all have gods and goddesses and in a complex mythology. They're building temples, they're building idols. It's everywhere, and art, is a huge part of that. Obviously, that's a function for a lot of art. So the Parthenon, chiseled out of rocks in the quarry, all of these columns, carved and put together and smoothed out. The Parthenon, even though it's in kind of rough shape today, used to be in amazing shape until it was used as a gunpowder registry or place to store gunpowder, and the Turks, accidentally blew up. I think a cannonball went into it and blew the roof off of it. Even this 1,000-year-old structure that was still thousands of years old, and it was still looked really well. Also, it was covered with statues and carved things, which have long since been taken and put in museums. And it's in a constant state of restoration today. But designed to be, one of the most perfect looking buildings, even though there are lots of little intricacies where it's been changed so that it looks as perfect as possible when you see it, because that reflected Greek ideals and Greek society. I like this slide because it shows a little bit of before and after. In other words, we see a lot of these ancient buildings and they're white, and we just assume that they were always gleaming white like this, and that's not the case. The ancients painted and intricately decorated all of their buildings. So have a look at this. You can see some of the sculpture there, but there's an example of how it would have been painted. And so just imagine how detailed the entire Parthenon and buildings in ancient Greece would have looked, when they were all covered with this incredible color and gold leaf as well. Pretty astounding. How do they know this? When they get up close, they can look and they can actually find trace remnants of the paint, which is long since washed off, and wind and rain have in thousands of years of time have certainly changed the way that it looks. The Greeks, fascinating people, and they were an openly humanistic people. That is, they had a very different perspective. So remember, art mirrors culture. What can we learn about the Greeks from how they show the body? First of all, we should talk about something, the elephant in the room here. But when we look at this statue, obviously it's very nude, right? I shouldn't have to remind you of that. And this is a common question that I get from a lot of students. Why is there so much nudity in art? I think you can blame the ancients for that, particularly the Greeks and the Romans, but the Greeks first because they came before the Romans, and the Romans emulated and took a lot of their culture from the Greeks. But the Greeks, openly kind of worshipped the perfection of the human body. They were fascinated with it, but more than that, if you know about Greek mythology, it's not like our Judeo-Christian sense of God. It's more like a big soap opera up in the sky, right? With all of these gods and goddesses who make mistakes and sleep around with each other. It's pretty R-rated, actually, most of it, the more you learn about it. And how are you supposed to depict gods and goddesses? Well, to the Greeks, the most effective way to do that was through the idealized nude form. And so what you're seeing here is an attempt to show Apollo, okay, as this strong, idealized nude form. Now, we'll come back to this in a moment. I do want to put up, here's a piece of Egyptian sculpture that's older, okay, next to a piece of Greek sculpture. Set aside the nudity for just a moment here, but look how rigid and robotic and stiff the ancient Egyptian sculpture is. That's not to say it's bad. That's just to say that it's a very different mindset. If you've, again, carving a stone is a ridiculously difficult thing to do. And when a figure is stiff and straight, it's a lot easier to carve. To actually make it look lifelike is much more difficult. So look at this ancient Greek Apollo. Look how he's actually got weight on one leg, but his hips are turned to the side. It's how people actually stand in real life, okay? He is meant to look as real as possible. So the Greeks figured out how to mimic the real world in an astonishing way with their sculpture. And that's twofold, okay? First of all, you're trying to show, bring life to a statue of a god here, right? So you want to make it look as real as possible. But also, the Greeks openly kind of worshipped the idea of humanism, this idea of humans being capable of amazing things. So anytime you see a nude in art, it's also the artist kind of showing off a little bit, attempting to say, human people actually made this. Took a piece of stone and gave life to it and made it look like a real. Because the human body is one of the most remarkable, complex, and tricky things to possibly sculpt or paint, what have you, whatever. There's always an element of the artist kind of showing you what they can do, which is why I think today, even down to today in our tradition, lots of times if you go to art school, you're going to be sketching a live nude model to try to figure out how to understand the human body in that way. We'll see the nude crop up a lot, but I think it often, it very much starts here. And it's just a huge part of art for that reason. And of course, there are politics to that as well, which we'll talk about later, that are going to be pretty important. This is a sculpture called the Laocoon. This is actually a Roman copy of an ancient Greek sculpture. So the ancient Greek one is long since gone, but the Roman one remains. And even for Roman stuff, it's 2,000 years old. Just try to wrap your head around how ridiculous this sculpture is. Here we have the god Laocoon, who's fighting along with his sons, this sea serpent who's wrapped around him here, preparing to bite him there. Look how just ridiculously strong he is, how you can actually see the musculature but see some of the veins underneath his skin. It's so lifelike, so realistic. The spray of the sea in his beard, the movement of his hair. I mean, it's the closest thing you can have to a black and white photograph, yet it was made, thousands of years ago. Absolutely astonishing. And, this is the pinnacle of Greek society, right? A piece of statue here that shows um, uh, gods, okay, or their deities from mythology, but also celebrates the miraculous accomplishments of really, really talented humans. A lot of what we know about the Greeks comes from their painting as well. So I showed you some Egyptian painting earlier, but here's some Greek painting, and they used vases for everyday functions, for wine and for water, for cleaning, for perfumes, for oils, and they all decorated them with these amazingly consistent pictures. So you can see here figures. Here's a dinner plate, the design on the plate. And this would have been, a way, again, art reflecting culture. If you're an artist in ancient Greece, this is a job. It was a job for kind of really low, poor commoners to be vase painters. But they all painted in a very similar way. Here's soldiers playing dice, a very famous vase. Oh, and the first Olympic Games, right? The Greeks kind of invented the Olympic Games in the shadow of Mount Olympus. So here you see some sprinters running in a race, and yes, ancient Greek athletes competed in the buff as well. So kind of crazy. Wouldn't have been unheard of in ancient Greece to actually walk around and see people, naked, rubbing their skin with oil, scraping their skins with stones. It was just they had a very different attitude towards nudity in the human body than we do today. Pretty crazy. I could show you lots of these. I'm not going to. I'm going to keep moving on. Now we're going to talk about the Romans, and this will bring us up to the end for today. So the Romans came along, and they very much mimicked Greek culture in a lot of ways. They, you might know that there are Roman names for mythological figures, okay, Greek names and Roman names. So, for example, Zeus is the Greek name, and Jupiter is the Roman name. So there's a lot of overlap. But of course, the Romans took everything and kind of amped it up, and also made some technical innovations as well. So here you actually see a very famous statue called the Augusta Prima Porta. This is the Emperor Augustus, okay, the first emperor, who Rome was a republic for hundreds of years, until wars and infighting led to Julius Caesar seizing control, and his nephew, Julius Caesar, of course, assassinated famously in the Ides of March, and his nephew takes over and becomes the first Roman dictator or emperor here. So this is Augustus. Now, look how massive he looks. His head is quite small compared to the size of his arm and the rest of his body. He's in this huge breastplate covered with figures kind of showing a historic battle. There's even a little putti, we call them, or a little cupid down there in the bottom corner. This little naked angel baby thing. He's pointing, confidently. I mean, for all intents and purposes here, this is not a dead-on portrait of Augustus as much as it is, Augustus as the god Apollo. And this is, reflecting culture, the power of the emperor, right? The emperor is basically a god to be worshipped. And in a lot of places around the Roman Empire, they actually had temples to the gods, but also temples to the emperors where you could worship statues like these. So other things that the Romans did, which were hugely important, architecture, okay, huge advances in architecture. You've probably seen this building before. This is the Roman Colosseum in Rome. If you get the chance to go to Rome, I highly recommend that you do it. It's an incredible thing to see. But the world's first enormous sports stadium. I've seen numbers range all over the place, but it could hold at least 50,000 people, and probably if people were standing and crowded in there as tightly as they possibly could, maybe even twice that. But incredible and impossible to make without Roman advances. So first of all would be the arch. And so what you see here is just these arches repeated over and over and over. There's something like 180 of them on the Colosseum. And the arch is important because it distributes weight. So the ancient Greeks made things out of solid blocks, as did the from a quarry, as did the ancient Egyptians, right, with the pyramids. Well, what you have here are uh, arches, so you have big openings. Basically, weight hits the top of that arch, okay, of all that stone, and is distributed through the rounded top of that arch out and down through those columns, which allows you to take something that could feel like a big cold tomb and to open it up with big old windows so you can get light and air, so that when the stadium empties, just like a modern stadium, you don't have backups. Everybody can go out their own doorway. Anyway, fascinating. So the arch is number one. Number two is concrete. Okay, so the Romans realized that you don't have to quarry all of these stones. You can actually pour forms with concrete. They discovered the formula for concrete, and that allowed them to not have to have huge quarries next to where they were building things, and allowed them to just build a ridiculous amount of buildings. Here's what the inside of the Colosseum looks like. It's very difficult today because it's taken earthquake damage from a major earthquake in the 600s, but also it's just been stripped of all of its marble. Kind of hard to see, but if you look kind of right towards the center on the far side there, you can see a little white blob, and there's a little white blob of marble seats. The whole thing used to be covered with marble. It must have been just absolutely amazing. But in the 2,000 years in between the fall of Rome and modern times, when huge buildings were built, such as St. Peter's Basilica, and they needed all this marble, they thought, well, why would we go pay for it? We can just go to the Colosseum. It's just sitting there in this ruin. And so, yeah, all the stone was stripped. And so today it's just a shell of its former glory. But you can see the floor there. It's a maze down underneath. That's where the gladiators and the wild animals were kept. It would have had wood over top of that and sand as well to be a big flat arena. But anyway, astounding. They could flood it with water for naval battles. It had big old tarps that could be drawn by sailors up on the top, or to pull these huge pieces of fabric to extend or have shade. And enormously advanced. Around Rome, there are arches as well, like this one. You can see how big they are. The Arc de Triomphe in Paris, a much, much later thing built by Napoleon in the 1800s, but of course meant to mimic the shape of the Roman arch built by the emperors. And what would happen is when there was a battle and a lot of spoils of war were brought back to Rome, they would build these big arches and have parades through the middle. This is the Arc of Constantine, which is right across the street from the Colosseum. Other cool things, this is they made these ornate columns. So this is called the Column of Marcus Aurelius. There's another famous column right down the street from this called the Column of Trajan. But you walk by it and it seems kind of curious, and then you look close and you realize that the entire thing is carved with literally tens of thousands of perfectly proportional soldiers, and it spirals from the bottom to the top. So in other words, if you unfolded it, it's this huge, long graphic novel or comic book, right, that tells the entire history, in this case, of Emperor Marcus Aurelius in the mid-2nd century here. All of his battles in conquering territory for the empire, of subduing peoples, bringing them into line. And of course, it all would have been painted as well. All of this stuff was painted, just like I showed you with the Greeks as well. Absolutely amazing. It just shows you how far and how advanced the Romans were. Here's probably the most famous Roman statue, this one in the Louvre in Paris, but the Venus de Milo is her name, the goddess Venus, goddess of love and beauty. We'll talk more about Venus later when we get to the Renaissance. Her arms long since broken off, but this exquisitely delicate, lifelike female nude here. Just absolutely astonishing, the ability that artists had in ancient Rome to do just incredible things with chisels and with painting as well. So almost done here, but there have been examples from the ancient world where we can see the paint, that where it hasn't washed off, or we don't just see trace amounts of it, but where it actually looks almost as good as the day it was painted. One example is in Pompeii, so south of Rome, a couple hours by train, is city of Pompeii, which is by Naples in Italy. And Mount Vesuvius is there. Mount Vesuvius blew up in the year 79. Pompeii was this kind of wealthy resort town and some of the villas or the wealthy people's houses had these exquisite paintings, and all of a sudden, their houses were buried by, 20 feet of volcanic ash, which basically just sealed it, and for over 1,000 years until they were rediscovered. So when you see them today, you can see these gorgeous colors, and incredibly lifelike figure paintings. Okay, so the Romans had figured out an enormous amount in terms of how to depict the world around them, both through stone and through painting. Here's another scene from Pompeii, just from a regular person's living room here, but you can see how they've actually painted the wall with a mythological scene. Okay, there's some nude figures there. And also, they've painted the wall to look like there are little windows or outcroppings in the wall, and they've kind of painted it with a false perspective so that it appears like a bookshelf or an opening. Um, Pretty astonishing. The Romans incredibly advanced. And this is where we're going to leave it today with this guy, not the random guy down at the bottom there, but the big head. So I like this slide. I found it on the internet. I don't know who that guy is, but I like it because it just shows scale and size. This enormous head you see above this tourist down below, that is the Emperor Constantine. Okay, so Emperor Constantine, extremely important for the history of Western society because he very much changed it. Constantine, emperor, towards the end of the Roman Empire in the mid 300s, but basically, Constantine. By the time Constantine came around, there was this group called Christians who were much more plentiful than they were in the hundreds of years prior, since the death of Christ. And so now you have Christianity is becoming a major religion. And you may have heard that other emperors had persecuted Christians and attempted to stamp them out. Constantine did the opposite. And there's legends about him, having visions of Christ and leading him into glory in the battlefield and all this. Most likely it was just a very politically proper move, right? So many Christians that he converted to Christianity, and he made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. So why is that important? Well, Roman Empire was huge. It went all around the entire Mediterranean region, North Africa, Middle East, and much of Europe. And then, so those ideas spread, right? Now all of a sudden, pagan temples are getting confused, as and changed into churches. And there's a lot of strange art that happens as a result of that, right? Art mirrors culture. But then not long after, in the 400s, Roman Empire is sacked, and the Roman Empire, or Western Roman Empire based in Rome, is no more. And so now what holds together this crazy, fragmented area? It's Christianity. Ideas of Christianity have spread. And but as you'll see, that can have strange visual consequences. So next time we're going to look at the art of the Middle Ages. Okay, so the art from the fall of Rome to the beginning of the Renaissance in Italy in the 1400s, and you'll see some very interesting takes on art from this view of perfection, the use of the nude in the human body. All of that is going to get kind of replaced by a spiritual kind of art that's meant to mimic the ideals of medieval Christianity. Pretty fascinating. We'll talk about that next time. Thanks for paying attention. See you later.